The massive doors of the council chamber slid open with a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the bones of everyone present. Ambassador Catherine Wells stepped inside, her boots clicking against the polished floor that reflected the light of 1,000 floating crystals above. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, but nothing could have truly made her ready for what was coming. The chamber was enormous, built to remind visitors of their insignificance. Towering pillars of blue crystal rose toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Seats carved from strange alien metals circled the room in rising tiers, and in those seats sat the representatives of the 12 most powerful species in the known galaxy. They had ruled the stars for longer than humanity had existed. They had built empires when humans were still learning to make fire, and now they looked down at Catherine with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open contempt. Behind her stood Commander Daniel Ortiz, a military man who had spent 30 years serving Earth's defense forces. His face betrayed nothing, but Catherine knew him well enough to sense the tension in his shoulders. Beside him were 3 junior diplomats and 2 security officers, all of them aware that they were stepping into the den of beings who considered humanity little more than clever animals. High Arbiter Zethrin sat in the highest seat of all. He was Velthari, a species that had dominated galactic politics for 8,000 years. His body was tall and thin, covered in skin that looked like polished black stone. 6 eyes glowed with soft purple light as he watched the humans take their positions in the center of the chamber floor. His long fingers tapped slowly against the armrest of his chair, each tap echoing in the silence. Catherine stopped at the designated spot, a small circle of white light that marked where petitioners were expected to stand. She kept her chin high and her hands steady at her sides. She would not show fear to these ancient powers. Humanity had earned its place among the stars through blood and sacrifice, and she would represent her people with dignity. Ambassador Wells Theron spoke, his voice deep and resonant, translated instantly by the implant behind her ear. You stand before the Galactic Council as representative of the species known as humanity. Your people have been members of this body for 18 of your solar years. In that time, you have benefited greatly from our protection and our trade. You have traveled our shipping lanes without payment. You have received our technology without contribution. The Council has been patient with your youth and your limitations. Catherine felt the words land like blows, but she kept her expression neutral. She had expected condescension. The Council had never hidden their view of humanity as inferior. The time has come, Zethron continued, for humanity to fulfill its obligations to the greater galactic community. The Council has deliberated and reached a unanimous decision regarding the tribute your species will provide. The word tribute sent a chill down Catherine's spine. It had not appeared in any of the communications leading up to this meeting. She exchanged a quick glance with Daniel, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. He had not been warned either. Counselor Myricel of the Kathrani rose from her seat. She was insectoid, with a hard shell of deep red and mandibles that clicked when she spoke. Her species had served the Velthari faithfully for 3,000 years, and they had grown wealthy from that service. The tribute requirements are as follows. Humanity will provide 30% of all agricultural output from Earth and its colonies to Council distribution centers. Humanity will grant full access to all mining operations in the Tau Ceti system, with profits to be shared according to Council formulas, and humanity will provide 2 million citizens for labor conscription, to be distributed among Council worlds according to need. The chamber fell silent. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face as the full meaning of the demands became clear. This was not taxation. This was not cooperation. This was slavery dressed in diplomatic language. Labor conscription, she repeated, keeping her voice steady through sheer will. You are demanding that we hand over 2 million of our people to work on your worlds. Against their will. The term conscription is accurate, Myricel replied without hesitation. All member species contribute labor to collective projects. Your people will be housed and fed according to standard protocols. Their service will strengthen the bonds between humanity and the greater community. Their service, Catherine said, or their servitude. A murmur passed through the chamber. Several counselors shifted in their seats, unused to such direct challenges from a junior species. Zethrin raised one long hand, and silence returned instantly. Ambassador Wells, you must understand your position. Humanity is young. Your technology is primitive compared to ours. Your military capacity is negligible. You exist at our sufferance. These tribute requirements are not suggestions. They are obligations that all member species have fulfilled throughout the history of the Council. You are not special. You are not exempt. Catherine turned to Christopher Lane, her senior aide, who handed her a secure communication tablet. Her fingers moved across the surface, composing a brief message to Earth Command. The words were simple and direct, explaining the demands and asking for guidance. She sent it and waited. The council members watched with varying degrees of amusement. They had seen this before, countless times. Young species always resisted at first. They always sent messages home, hoping their governments would find some way out. And they always capitulated in the end, because the alternative was destruction. 4 minutes passed in tense silence. Then the tablet chimed with a response. Catherine read the message twice to make sure she understood it correctly. Then she looked up at High Arbiter Zethron, at the ancient being who had crushed the hopes of 100 species before her. And she smiled. The United Nations of Earth has reviewed your demands, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Our government has authorized me to deliver our official response. She paused, letting the moment stretch. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on her. Our response is one word, no. The reaction was immediate and violent. Counselors shouted in languages that the translators struggled to process. Myricell's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Catherine recognized as Kethrani fury. Several representatives rose from their seats, pointing at the human delegation with gestures that needed no translation. But Zethrin remained still. His 6 eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence. The chamber obeyed. Ambassador Wells, Zethrin said slowly, you understand what you have just done. You have refused a lawful demand of the Galactic Council. The consequences of this refusal are clearly outlined in the membership charter your people signed. You have one of your solar cycles to reconsider? If humanity does not comply by then, the Council fleet will enforce our decision. Your colonies will be occupied. Your resources will be seized. Your people will be conscripted by force rather than agreement. And those who resist will be eliminated. Catherine did not flinch. She had known this was coming the moment she read the message from Earth. Her government had made their choice, and now she would stand by it. High Arbiter, she said. Humanity did not climb out of the oceans, survive the death of our ancient civilizations, endure plagues and wars and disasters that would have broken lesser peoples, just to become servants to those who never struggled. We built ourselves from nothing. We reached the stars through our own efforts, and we will not bow to masters simply because they are older than us. She turned to leave, her delegation falling into step behind her. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at the council one final time. If you want tribute from Earth, you are welcome to come and take it. But I promise you this. The price will be higher than you can imagine, and you will learn why our ancestors called us the species that does not surrender. She walked out of the chamber without waiting for a response, leaving behind a council that had just received a shock they had not experienced in 12,000 years of absolute rule. Humanity had said no, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The news spread across Earth and every human colony within hours of Catherine Wells returning from the council station. Every screen, every broadcast, every communication device carried the same message. The Galactic Council had demanded tribute. They had demanded slaves. And humanity had refused. For 3 days, people debated what this meant. Some were afraid, knowing that the Council commanded fleets that could reduce cities to ash in minutes. Others were angry, furious that beings who had never lifted a finger to help humanity now expected payment in blood and labor. But beneath the fear and the anger, something else began to grow. It was a feeling that humans had carried with them since the first of their ancestors stood upright on the plains of ancient Africa. It was defiance. deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in facilities that had been built during darker times when humans still feared each other. Dr. Linda Morrison gathered her team for a meeting that would change the course of the coming war. She was 50 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that sparkled with an intelligence that had earned her 3 Nobel Prizes before her 40th birthday. Around her sat 300 of the brightest minds humanity had ever produced. Engineers and physicists and weapons designers who had spent their careers preparing for threats that they hoped would never come. "The Council thinks we are primitives," Linda said. Standing at the front of the massive underground laboratory, they gave us technology and expected us to be grateful. They never bothered to check what we did with it. She pressed a button, and holographic displays flickered to life around the room. Schematics and equations floated in the air, showing designs that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. For 18 years, we have been studying every piece of Council technology we could get our hands on. We have taken it apart, understood how it works, and found ways to make it better. The Council stopped innovating 10,000 years ago. They found solutions that worked and never improved them. But humans are different. We are never satisfied. We always want more. She gestured to a rotating image of an engine core that glowed with contained power. This is the Morrison drive. It produces twice the energy of standard Council engines at half the size. Their ships are faster than ours, but ours will be more maneuverable. Their weapons have longer range, but ours will hit harder. They have numbers, but we have creativity. Admiral Grace Sullivan stood near the back of the room, watching the presentation with sharp eyes. She was 62 years old and had commanded Earth's defense fleet for the past decade. Her hair was iron gray, and her face carried the lines of someone who had made hard decisions and lived with the consequences. She had never expected to fight a war against the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, but she had spent her entire career preparing for exactly that possibility. "How long until we can retrofit the fleet?" she asked. 3 months for the primary combat vessels," Linda replied. 6 months for full deployment across all ships. "But Admiral, I need you to understand something. These technologies are untested in actual combat. We have run simulations, but simulations cannot predict everything. There will be surprises." Grace nodded slowly. "There are always surprises in war. The question is whether we can adapt faster than they can. And that, Dr. Morrison, is something humans have always been good at." Across the solar system, similar scenes played out in shipyards and factories and military bases. On Mars, Governor Samuel Price addressed a crowd of colonists who had gathered in the main dome of New Houston. These were people who had left Earth to build a new life on a hostile world. People who had struggled against dust storms and radiation and the constant threat of equipment failure. They were not the kind of people who surrendered easily. "The Council calls us young," Samuel said, his voice carrying across the assembled thousands. "They say we are primitive. They look at our short history and see weaknesses, but they do not understand what that history means. In just a few thousand years, we went from caves to starships. We split the atom. We cured diseases that killed millions. We walked on moons and built cities in the void of space. Every generation of humanity has done what the previous generation thought was impossible. And now these ancient rulers want us to bow? They want us to give them our children as slaves?" He paused, looking out at the faces before him. Miners and engineers and farmers and teachers, all of them watching him with fierce determination in their eyes. "I say no. I say we show them what humanity can do when we are pushed. I say we remind the galaxy why our ancestors called us the species that never gives up." The crowd roared their approval, and that sound echoed through every colony, every station, every ship where humans lived and worked. They were preparing for war, but more than that, they were remembering who they were. Meanwhile, in the shadows of galactic politics, not everyone supported the Council's demands. The Thesari were an aquatic species who had joined the Council 6,000 years ago. They were philosophers and scientists, beings who valued knowledge above power. Their representative, an elder named Counselor Drizvan, had abstained from the vote, demanding tribute from humanity. Now, through encrypted channels that the Council could not monitor, he reached out to Ambassador Wells. You must understand, his message said, that many of us remember what our species were before the Council absorbed us. We were diverse and creative and free. Now we serve. We obey. We have forgotten how to dream. Your people have reminded us of something we lost long ago. We cannot openly support you, for the Council would crush us, but we will not fight against you either. And there are others who feel as we do, more than the Council knows. Catherine read the message in her quarters on the diplomatic station where she had chosen to remain as a gesture of defiance. She smiled for the first time in weeks. The Council presented a united front to the galaxy, but cracks were forming beneath the surface. Ancient resentments were stirring. Humanity's refusal had lit a spark that could become a fire. Commander Daniel Ortiz brought her daily reports on the Council fleet massing near the edge of the solar system. 200 warships, each one a veteran of countless actions against species who had dared to resist. The Council had never lost a military engagement in 12,000 years of recorded history. They had crushed rebellions before they could begin. They had burned worlds that refused to submit. They were utterly confident in their superiority. They are not preparing for a battle, Daniel said, pointing to the tactical displays. They are preparing for an execution. They expect us to see their fleet and surrender before a shot is fired. That is how it has always worked before. Catherine studied the display, noting the positions of enemy ships, their formations, their apparent state of readiness. Then we will have to teach them something new. Humanity does not execute easily. She transmitted a message to Admiral Sullivan, containing everything she had learned about Council fleet tactics from 18 years of observation. Weaknesses that the Council did not know they had. Assumptions that had never been tested against an enemy who refused to play by their rules. The pieces were moving into position. The storm was gathering. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, 200 Council warships waited for the order to advance, completely unaware that they were sailing toward the first defeat their civilization had ever known. Humanity was young. Humanity was outnumbered. Humanity was facing the greatest military power the galaxy had ever seen, and humanity was ready. The Council fleet entered the Sol system on a Tuesday morning, according to Earth time. 200 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark metal that had been forged in shipyards older than human civilization. At the head of this armada flew the Eternal Judgment, flagship 3 kilometers long that had crushed rebellions across 100 worlds. High Arbiter Zethrin stood on its bridge, watching the tactical displays with cold satisfaction. He expected this battle to last perhaps 6 hours. The humans would see his fleet and realize the hopelessness of their situation. They would fire a few desperate shots to satisfy their pride, and then they would surrender. It had happened this way countless times before with countless other species. There was no reason to expect anything different. The human fleet has been detected, his sensor officer reported. 47 vessels holding position near the 4th planet. Zethrin made a sound that might have been laughter among his people. 47 ships against 200. The humans were even more foolish than he had thought. They could have at least attempted to build more vessels in the months since they had refused tribute. Instead, they had apparently decided to die with what little they had. Signal all ships to advance, he commanded. Standard conquest formation. Let us finish this quickly. The Council fleet moved forward like a great wave of destruction, confident and unstoppable. Their weapons began charging, filling the void with energy that could crack planets. Victory seemed certain. Admiral Grace Sullivan watched them come from the bridge of the ESS Valiant. Her ship was smaller than even the smallest Council cruiser. A vessel that looked like a toy compared to the monsters approaching. But appearances, as humanity had learned long ago, could be deceiving. All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan, she said into the fleet-wide channel. Her voice was calm and steady, the voice of a woman who had made peace with whatever fate awaited her. The enemy is advancing as predicted. They expect us to fight like every other species they have conquered. They expect us to stand in neat lines and die with honor. Today, we will teach them that humans do not fight for honor. We fight to win. She paused, looking at the faces of her bridge crew. Young men and women who had trained their entire lives for a battle that everyone said they could not win. She saw no fear in their eyes, only determination. Execute pattern Omega on my mark, and may whatever gods you believe in watch over us all. Mark. The human fleet scattered. 47 ships broke formation and flew in every direction, splitting into groups of 3 and 4 that twisted through space in patterns that seemed random but were anything but. Council targeting systems, designed to track enemies who fought in predictable formations, suddenly had nothing to lock onto. Their weapons fired at empty space where human ships had been moments before at the same time. Thousands of small objects began emerging from the asteroid belt. The Council's sensors detected them but classified them as debris, too small to be weapons, too numerous to be ships. This was a mistake that would cost them dearly. The objects were hunter-killer drones, each one no larger than a ground vehicle but packed with explosives. Powerful enough to cripple a cruiser, Dr. Morrison's team had built them in secret, hiding the manufacturing facilities in asteroids that the Council had never bothered to scan. Now these little machines of death activated their engines and streaked toward the enemy fleet like a swarm of angry insects. The first wave struck before the Council commanders understood what was happening. 7 ships died in 90 seconds, their shields overwhelmed by attacks they had never been designed to stop. Explosions bloomed in the darkness of space, each one marking the death of a vessel that had never known defeat. Zethrin watched in disbelief, his tactical display filled with damage reports. This was impossible. These were primitives. They built their first spacecraft only 3 centuries ago. They could not be doing this. Adjust formation, he shouted at his officers. Close the gaps. Concentrate fire on the larger human vessels. But the humans had anticipated this response. As the Council fleet tried to regroup, the scattered Earth ships came together in small attack clusters that struck at exposed flanks. They moved with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic, each ship knowing exactly where to be and when to fire, and their weapons were unlike anything the Council had ever faced. Dr. Morrison had discovered something during her years of studying Council technology. The elder races used energy shields that operated on specific frequencies that had been standardized across the galaxy for thousands of years. No one had ever thought to challenge this standard because no one had ever needed to. But human scientists, always questioning, always pushing, had found frequencies that the standard shields could not block. The particle lances mounted on human ships fired beams of energy that passed through Council shields as if they did not exist. Warships that had survived centuries of combat suddenly found themselves vulnerable to enemies they had dismissed as insignificant. The ESS Valiant led a strike group of 5 ships directly at the Council Center. Admiral Sullivan stood at the front of her bridge, gripping the railing as her ship shook from near misses and debris impacts. Around her, the battle raged in 3 dimensions, a chaos of fire and death that no simulation could have prepared her for. Target the command ships, she ordered. Make them feel what it means to fight humans. A particle lance from the Valiant struck a Council battlecruiser directly in its engine section. The massive ship shuddered and went dark, drifting helplessly as its crew scrambled to restore power that would never return. 2 more battlecruisers fell in the next 10 minutes, their captains unable to believe what was happening even as their ships died around them. Zethrin watched the destruction of his fleet with growing horror. 30 ships lost in the first hour. Then 40. Then 50. This was not a battle. This was a disaster. Fall back, he commanded, his voice breaking for the first time in his long life. All ships fall back to defensive positions. We will regroup. His words were cut short by a massive impact that threw him from his feet. The eternal judgment shook as if struck by the hand of an angry god. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as systems failed and lights flickered. Report, he demanded, pulling himself up from the deck. Direct hit to our engine section, an officer replied, terraplane in his voice. Primary power is failing. We have lost propulsion. The mighty flagship of the Galactic Council, the ship that had brought death to countless worlds, was crippled by a human vessel 1/10 its size. The retreat that followed was not orderly. Council ships fled in every direction, abandoning formation, abandoning each other, thinking only of escape. 43 of their vessels would never escape at all, left behind as burning wreckage or captured by human boarding parties. Thousands of Council crew members became prisoners of the species they had come to enslave. When the last enemy ship vanished into hyperspace, Admiral Sullivan allowed herself to breathe. The battle had cost humanity 11 ships and 2,000 lives. The price was terrible. The victory was beyond anything they had dared to hope. She opened a channel to Earth, to the billions of people waiting to learn their fate. This is Admiral Sullivan. The Council fleet has been defeated. Sol system is secure. Humanity stands. Across Earth, across Mars, across every colony and station where humans lived, the celebration began. They had done the impossible. They had faced the greatest military power in galactic history and sent it running. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Council had been beaten in open combat, and the galaxy would never forget the species that had done it. 3 months passed after the Battle of Sol, and the galaxy watched humanity with new eyes. The species that everyone had dismissed as primitive had done something that no one thought possible. They had defeated the Council in open war. They had sent the mighty fleet running back to its masters with tales of terror and destruction. And now, they waited to see what would happen next. The Council was not accustomed to defeat. For 12,000 years they had ruled without serious challenge. Species that resisted were crushed. Worlds that rebelled were burned. The order of the galaxy had been maintained through absolute power, and absolute power did not tolerate humiliation. High Arbiter Zethrin had survived the battle, rescued from his crippled flagship by a fast courier ship. But his reputation had not survived with him. The other Council members looked at him with contempt, blaming him for the disaster, even though they had all supported the attack. But the Council had ruled for 12,000 years because they understood something that younger civilizations often forgot. War was only one way to defeat an enemy. There were other methods, quieter methods, that could be just as effective. Ambassador Catherine Wells received the invitation on a cool morning in her quarters on the diplomatic station. It was written in the formal language of Council protocol, full of flowery phrases and careful words that meant nothing. But the core message was clear. The Council wished to negotiate peace. They regretted the misunderstanding that had led to conflict. They were prepared to recognize humanity as an equal partner in galactic affairs. With all the rights and privileges that such recognition would bring, Catherine read the invitation 3 times before responding. She did not trust the Council. She had seen too much of their cruelty to believe they had suddenly changed their ways. But she also knew that she could not refuse to negotiate without making humanity look like the aggressor. The galaxy was watching, and public opinion mattered even among the stars. "It is a trap," Commander Daniel Ortiz said, when she showed him the message. His face was hard with suspicion. "They lost the battle, so now they will try to win through deception." "Probably," Catherine agreed. "But we have to go. If we refuse, they will tell everyone that humans are warmongers who do not want peace. We will lose the support of the neutral species who are starting to see us as heroes." She assembled a small delegation for the journey to Corinthax, a neutral station that floated in the empty space between star systems. The station had been built centuries ago as a place where enemies could meet without fear. Its neutrality guaranteed by ancient treaties that even the Council respected. Or so everyone believed. Catherine brought Michelle Porter, young diplomatic attaché who had shown great promise during the crisis. Michelle was 28 years old, with bright eyes and a quick mind that had impressed everyone who worked with her. She believed in the mission with all her heart, convinced that peace was possible if both sides were willing to work for it. Catherine hoped that belief would not be proven foolish. The security detail consisted of 12 Marines led by Sergeant William Cruz, a veteran of 30 years who had fought in conflicts across human space. He was not a man who trusted easily, and he made his concerns known before they departed. "My gut tells me something is wrong," he said to Catherine in private. "I have walked into ambushes before. This feels the same." "I know," Catherine replied. "Stay alert. Protect the delegation. And if things go bad, get our people out no matter what." The journey to Corinthax took for days. The station itself was beautiful, a masterwork of engineering that hung in the void like a jewel against the black velvet of space. Its halls were decorated with art from 100 worlds, and its atmosphere was carefully balanced to accommodate species with vastly different needs. It should have been a place of hope. The negotiations began well. High Arbiter Zethrin was notably absent, replaced by a Kathrani diplomat named Vostar, who seemed genuinely interested in finding common ground. He spoke of mutual respect and shared futures. He acknowledged that the Council had made mistakes in their dealings with humanity. He offered concessions that would have been unthinkable just months before. Catherine allowed herself to feel cautious optimism. Perhaps the defeat had truly changed them. Perhaps they had finally realized that humanity was not like the other species they had conquered. Perhaps peace was actually possible. On the 4th day of negotiations, she woke to the sound of alarms. Sergeant Cruz burst into her quarters with his weapon drawn and his face tight with controlled fear. "Ambassador, we have a situation. Council special forces are moving through the station. They are not here to negotiate." Catherine felt her blood turn cold. "How many?" "At least 50, maybe more. They are sealing off sections and moving toward the diplomatic quarters." "Ambassador, this is an assassination mission." The truth hit Catherine like a physical blow. The negotiations had never been real. The Council had lured them here with promises of peace. And now they would kill the human delegation and blame it on terrorists or criminals. It would give them justification for total war. A war where they could claim to be the victims rather than the aggressors. "Get everyone together," Catherine ordered. Her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her heart. "We are leaving now." The escape was a nightmare. Council assassins seemed to be everywhere, their weapons filling the corridors with deadly energy. The Marines fought with desperate courage, holding choke points while the diplomats ran for the docking bay. Catherine saw 2 of her security officers fall in the first minutes, their bodies crumpling as plasma bolts found their marks. They were halfway to the docking bay when Michelle Porter pushed Catherine aside and took a blast that had been aimed at her heart. The young woman collapsed into Catherine's arms, her chest smoking from the wound that had killed her instantly. Her eyes were still open, still bright with the idealism that had defined her short life. "Tell them," Michelle whispered with her last breath. "Tell Earth!" Catherine wanted to scream. She wanted to weep. But there was no time for grief. Sergeant Cruz pulled her to her feet and pushed her forward. His weapon firing at enemies she could barely see. They reached the docking bay with only 5 survivors. The shuttle was still there, untouched by the chaos that had consumed the station. But Council forces were closing in from every direction. Someone had to hold them back long enough for the ship to launch. Sergeant Cruz made the decision without hesitation. "Get on the shuttle, Ambassador. I will hold them here." "William, no. Come with us." He shook his head, a sad smile crossing his weathered face. "Someone has to close the door. It has been an honor serving with you, ma'am. Now go. Tell them what happened here. Make sure Michelle did not die for nothing." He turned and walked toward the advancing enemy, his weapon blazing. Catherine watched him disappear around a corner, heard the sounds of desperate combat, and then heard nothing at all. The shuttle launched seconds later. Racing toward human space with its precious cargo of survivors and evidence, Catherine sat in the back, clutching a data tablet that contained everything she had gathered about the Council's treachery. Encrypted communications that proved the assassination was planned from the beginning, names of every Council member who had approved the operation, footage from station cameras that showed the truth of what had happened. The Council had wanted to silence humanity's voice. Instead, they had given humanity a weapon more powerful than any fleet. The truth, and Catherine Wells would make sure the entire galaxy heard it. The broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy within hours. Governor Samuel Price of Mars stood before cameras that transmitted his words to billions of beings across thousands of worlds. His face was grim, his voice heavy with controlled rage as he told the truth about what had happened at Corinthax. "The Galactic Council invited our ambassador to peace negotiations," he said. "They promised safety. They promised dialogue. They promised a new beginning. And then they sent assassins to murder her and everyone with her. They killed innocent diplomats. They killed Marines who were there only to protect. They violated every law they claimed to uphold, every principle they pretend to believe in. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle across the listening galaxy. Ambassador Catherine Wells survived. She escaped with proof of what the Council planned. We have their communications. We have their orders. We have the names of every leader who approved this cowardly attack. The Galactic Council is not a government. It is a criminal conspiracy wearing the mask of civilization. And humanity will no longer pretend otherwise. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Species that had served the Council for millennia watched the evidence with growing horror. They had always suspected the truth about their masters, but suspicion was different from proof. Now they had proof, and it changed everything within one solar cycle. 6 species formally withdrew from the Galactic Council. The Thesari were first, their elder counselor Drizvan delivering a speech that denounced 10,000 years of oppression and corruption. The Mordrani followed, then the Selvath, then 3 others whose names humans had barely learned. Each withdrawal weakened the Council further. Each departure encouraging others who had been too afraid to act. But High Arbiter Zethrin was not finished. He had ruled too long to surrender without a final desperate attempt to maintain his power. He assembled the largest fleet in Council history, 800 warships gathered from every loyal species that remained. This would not be a police action or a lesson in obedience. This would be total war, the complete destruction of humanity as a warning to any who might think of following their example.
We will burn their worlds,
Zethrin declared to his commanders. We will leave nothing alive. Future generations will speak of humanity as a cautionary tale, a foolish species that dared to challenge their betters and paid the ultimate price. Admiral Grace Sullivan received reports of the approaching armada with calm acceptance. She had known this moment would come. The Council could not allow humanity to survive after everything that had happened. Their entire system of control depended on the belief that resistance was impossible, and humanity had proven that belief to be a lie. She gathered her fleet at the edge of the Oort cloud. The vast field of ice and rock that marked the boundary of the solar system, 200 human ships waited there, joined by vessels from the Sari and Mordrani and other species who had chosen to stand with Earth. They were still outnumbered 4-1. But numbers alone did not win battles. All ships. This is Admiral Sullivan, she announced as the Council fleet emerged from hyperspace. Today we fight not just for humanity, but for every species that has ever suffered under Council rule. Today we fight for the freedom of the galaxy. Whatever happens in the next few hours, know that you have already won something that can never be taken away. You have proven that tyranny can be resisted. You have shown the universe that courage matters more than numbers. Now, let us show them what free beings can do. The battle began with a fury that made the first engagement look like a skirmish. Council ships advanced in waves, their weapons filling space with deadly light. Human vessels and their allies struck back with everything they had. Particle lances and missiles and the hunter-killer drones that had proven so effective before. The fighting raged for 16 hours. Ships died on both sides, their crews perishing in explosions that briefly outshone the distant stars. Admiral Sullivan lost track of how many friends she watched die, how many brave captains vanished from her tactical display. But she also watched Council ships fall in numbers that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. And then something unexpected began to happen. Transmissions flooded, Council communication frequencies. Messages from crews who had been conscripted from conquered species, beings who had served their masters out of fear rather than loyalty. They had watched humanity stand alone against the greatest power in the galaxy. They had watched humanity win. And now, with the Council's attention focused on this final battle, they found the courage to act. Ships began shutting down their weapons. Others turned on their Council officers. Marines from enslaved species finally rising against the masters who had oppressed them for generations. Chaos spread through the Council fleet as loyalty collapsed and ancient resentments exploded into open rebellion. Zethrin watched his armada tear itself apart from the bridge of his new flagship. He screamed orders that no one obeyed, demanded loyalty from beings who had never truly given it. His 6 eyes burned with rage and disbelief as everything he had built crumbled around him. The end came quickly. His flagship was not destroyed by human weapons, but by a mutiny of its own crew. Beings who had served the Velthari for 3,000 years finally refused to serve any longer. They locked Zethrin in his own bridge and surrendered the vessel to the human fleet. When the shooting stopped, the Council Armada had ceased to exist. 400 ships destroyed, 200 captured, and the rest scattered across the galaxy with crews in open revolt. The civilization that had ruled the stars for 12,000 years had fallen in a single day. Ambassador Catherine. Wells watched the final moments of the battle from a command station on Luna. She wept for the first time since Corinthax, tears streaming down her face as she thought of everyone who had died to make this moment possible. Michelle Porter, who had believed in peace until the very end. Sergeant William Cruz, who had given his life so that the truth could survive. Thousands of sailors and soldiers and civilians, who had sacrificed everything for a future they would never see. 6 months later, Catherine stood in a chamber that humans had built with their own hands. The station orbited Earth. It's a symbol of everything humanity had achieved since that day when they had said no to masters who thought themselves invincible. Around her sat representatives from 18 species, each one committed to building something new from the ashes of the old order. "We could have surrendered," Catherine said, addressing the first session of the Free Systems Alliance. "When the Council demanded tribute, we could have paid. When they demanded slaves, we could have obeyed. We could have survived as they allowed, living on our knees, grateful for whatever scraps they chose to give us. Instead, we chose to fight." She looked around the chamber at the diverse assembly of beings who had risked everything to be here. "Not because we love war. We do not. We have seen too much death to ever love war. But because some things are worth more than survival, dignity, freedom, the right to choose our own path through the stars. These are the principles that brought us here today. These are the principles that will guide us forward." She paused, remembering the moment when everything had changed, when a single word had set the galaxy on fire. The Council demanded tribute. Humanity responded with one word: no. Today, that word belongs to all of us. Today, we write a new chapter in the history of the galaxy. Today, and for all the days that follow, we are free. The chamber erupted in applause, a sound of hope and triumph that echoed across the stars. 18 species united in a common cause, building a future where no one would ever again kneel before tyrants who demanded obedience. The galaxy had changed forever, and it had all begun with one small species who refused to bow.